and welcome to How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rietta.
And I'm Connie. And today we're here with Roger Marsh. So, Roger, how do you deal when shit gets real? But just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Oh, right. See, I was in the Australian Army, or in the military, most of my working life up until 2019 when I was medically discharged. Yeah, during that time, a fair bit of, crapola hit the fan. Mm-hmm. So I became very used to dealing when things were flying and they were smelling and gooey. It was a way of life, actually. And it's been one of the more interesting parts of transitioning out of the military. Is like, things aren't quite as insane as they were. Is this normal?
What is normal?
Yeah, that's right. Should I be waiting for like an airplane to hit me from the side, or something like that, which I was used to.
So, did you ever work with the American military?
Yes, in Afghanistan, I worked with 2nd Striker Cavalry Regiment, and also with the United States Marine Corps when I was posted to Darwin. I was in an aviation regiment in that posting, and we always had a Marine Corps pilot attached to the regiment. And at that time, the US Marines were starting to base people more permanently or more regularly in Australia, not permanently as such. Probably of those two services, the Marines are more like Australian soldiers. Even down to the way basic training structured is actually very similar to the US Marine Corps.
That's interesting.
About the same duration. And so you do basic training, then you do your individual trade training. So whether it's infantry or armour or artillery or whatever, you go on what we call initial employment training, and then you get posted to a line unit, usually, unless you're some sort of weird trade that's very unusual.
Do you guys do the crucible at the end of your basic training where you are awake for like 3 days or something ungodly like that?
Oh, there's something similar to it. It's called the challenge, but I think that may have changed now. But it's basically a consolidation of everything from recruit training in terms of battle skills. So they where they have to apply everything they learned in simulated combat, and you've got conduct of capturing prisoners, you've got treatment of casualties, you've got a weight-loaded march of a certain distance and that sort of thing. It may have changed. There was some issues with I had 2 postings to Kapuka, which is the Australian Army's equivalent of Paris Island.
Oh, okay.
But we only have one basic training centre now. We used to have more than one. And it was interesting. My first posting there, the types of injuries were very different to my second posting. I noticed that recruits the second time around actually had a lot more serious injuries. And we actually put that down to a generation coming through who played less sport. And,
really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're more sedentary in there. As I was 46 when I posted in, and I did and I was the head of the chaplaincy cell. I decided to do an running endurance session with recruits, which was basically just interval training of a certain kind. And fully a third of these 18 to 25-year-olds couldn't keep up with me. And I'm like, what the?
Come on. What is happening?
You should be smoking me.
I can assure you I was letting them know. But I turned around to a physical training instructor, PTI as we call them, and I said to her, look, these kids just can't keep up. And she went, yeah, what did you do when you were a teenager? So and I went, well, I played sport. That was my entertainment. And she went, yeah, well, there's the issue. So we have had to take people from a lower baseline bring them up to the standard that we need, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, I bet. Was chaplain always your I don't know. I don't know, does the Australian call it MOS, like when it's your job? And were you always a chaplain, or did you have a different?
It's your core. So another similarity between the US Marines and the Army is the rubric. We say soldier first. So even chaplains in the Australian Army train on weapons, and the photos, a couple of the photos of me on Instagram carrying a weapon as me as a chaplain in Afghanistan.
Yeah, the chaplains in the Marine Corps still train on weapons as well, and they still carry weapons. I just wasn't sure what your like designated MOS is or whatever the Australian Army calls it.
Core. Yeah, it's our core. So if you look at the other thing, where our ranks and our army structure is very much like the British. So all of basic instruction during basic training is delivered by corporals, because we don't have many ranks at the sergeant level. There's only just sergeant. And so a sergeant is like the most senior non-commissioned officer in a platoon, and a bit like a staff sergeant. The corporal is actually the equivalent of a certain sergeant within the US military. And it's a very important rank. So they do the same job. So there's a lot of differences in but every corps of the Army, so Armoured Corps, Royal Australian Army Chaplains Department, Infantry Corps, Artillery, and so forth. Yeah, you got different badges.
This is also enlightening.
Yeah. This is from when I was in an aviation unit as a chaplain. So that's the Aviation Corps Beret, which is powder blue. And that's the Chaplains Department badge.
That's a cool badge.
It's very politically incorrect. There's it's got the cross of the Knights of St. John, the Crusader Order. And the motto is "In this sign conquer." So it's goes back to the Roman Emperor Constantine. Whereas this is an armored corps beret with the regimental badge of 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment. So they're cavalry, and you can see like the crown and so forth. I'm not sure now that there's a king. That's a queen's crown. As far as regimental badges go, the one when there's a king, there is normally a slightly different crown on a regimental badge, but I don't know when they'll start changing that.
Interesting.
Oh yeah.
So when we take our oath of service, it's all an allegiance to the crown. It's not to the country.
It's very different.
Yeah. So as part of the Commonwealth, we're a different nation to Great Britain, but we still take the same oath as the Brits, or very similar. But the Americans were both similar and different, particularly in Afghanistan. There was some, we saw some real similarities, but also some
stark differences.
Yeah. So in terms of people who join the military in Australia, 42% of the army come from the state of Queensland. Queensland's a bit like the Texas /
I love that comparison. It's great. It's like Texas. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, it's large.
Yeah, it's large.
It's a very big state.
Yeah, and a lot of the Marine Corps comes from Texas.
Yep. And it's slightly crazy.
Just like and Texas.
There's also the two largest army bases are in Queensland. So a lot of Queenslanders say, if I join the army, then I've got a good chance of actually being in my home state. Whereas Navy and Air Force are a little bit different. But in Australia, you've got the breakdown of people who join who are from military families. So that's me. Often people ask, when did you join? I said, well, actually, when I was born, because my father was a gunnery instructor in the Navy, and he got out of the Navy before I was born, but he never left the Navy in his mind, or the Navy never left him. I grew up with a very military mindset and so forth. So that's one kind of person who joins in Australia. Then we get the ones who are curious and not quite sure what they want to do in life, and they, for whatever reason, believe the pitch of Defence Force recruiting. And then there are those who are desperate to leave a life behind that they are in, and who come from either conditions of awful of poverty or some other kind of life struggle.
I feel like it's pretty similar here.
Yeah, I think what struck me about the American recruits and sitting down with them, well, not recruits, soldiers, just hearing their stories, was the poverty that some of these guys had come from was way worse than you would get just about anywhere in Australia. It was like a Marine Corps heavy weapons platoon sergeant and I sit on an exercise together, just yarning, and his family couldn't afford meat when he was growing up, and so they hunted every bit of protein that they got. And consequently, he was actually very resilient and competent in a field environment.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. So he's quite good at, not making himself seen in the bush. The number of kids who come from poor backgrounds who joined in order to get the GI Bill so they could go to college.
Oh, yeah.
And not have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. We don't have that.
Yeah, because your guys' college is free and part of the state, right?
No, not free.
No? Okay.
No. It's getting more and more expensive.
Oh, you have our problem too then.
Yeah. I've got 2, probably soon to be 3 kids at university. And so what happens is you pay a certain amount up front and then you pay off the rest through the tax system.
Oh.
So you've got a pretty horrendous tax bill for the next 20 years of your life.
Oh my gosh. No, thank you.
Yeah. With going to university, you really, these days, you do have to weigh up whether it's worth it. There was free university for like a 20-year window in Australia's history. No, less than that, probably about 10 or 15 years.
Uh-huh.
But then the fees came in and they weren't too high, but now they're sort of
astronomical.
They're creeping up.
Here it's astronomical.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my sons has looked at going to a seminary in the United States, and he's like, "No!"
He's like, "Never mind." I saw the bill. No thanks.
How do I? I've got to earn a 6-figure income in order to. No, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
One thing that is free in the Australian education system is if you're doing a PhD, a doctorate.
Really?
They're free because you're seen as adding to academic excellence. Yeah, it is helpful. But for our soldiers, if they want to go to university, they may get some, if they haven't already got a degree, they may get some help when they leave the military. It really depends.
Yeah.
I went to university before I joined, so it was a different sort of setup. Culturally, I think that the two militaries are different. Australians are like, I had an American chaplain come up to me in absolute shock. He was absolutely shell-shocked. And I'm like, yeah, what's up, dude? This was in Afghanistan. And he just went, your guys swear so much.
Really? That's the difference? Man, and maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the potty mouth. I just assume everybody swears a lot.
I said, no, you need to listen to them, because if you listen to where the F word or the S word or all these other things are in the sentence, it's actually vocalized punctuation, or an audible question mark. What the F? All that sort of thing. And
yeah.
Like, okay, and he comes back to it. You're right. They're using it to like color a sentence, to emphasize or
Just
de-emphasize.
making things more colorful. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was horrified because normally American soldiers in front of him wouldn't swear, whereas Australians didn't care. Whatever.
Interesting.
Yeah, they didn't. And there was differences in the way chaplains operated within the various militaries. In some ways, actually, Australian chaplains had a little more freedom because of the way things were set up. But you could never try in the Australian Army as a chaplain to be an enforcer of morality of any kind, because you'd get smacked. The guys just wouldn't talk to you. You had to just kind of, well, that's not what I would choose to do, but this is humanity we're dealing with here, not my ideals. And that's with the mindset you had to go in with. It used to get quite fruity. Apparently, a friend of mine got handcuffed to a stripper when he was chaplain of a particular regiment.
Alrighty then.
That was back in the 90s. These days, there'd be a government inquiry and it'd be all over the news.
That's how it is everywhere now.
Yeah.
So how did you transition from being in the military to being out of the military to now being a writer? I mean, talk about a change.
Well, I actually got medically discharged because PTSD began to bite me pretty hard. And I couldn't. The way I got picked up was actually I knew I had PTSD. It's like I know I've got it. And then you try and work your way around it. But what happened every time I was on call, so able to be called in after hours, straight afterwards I got sick. And I went to the medical centre for the umpteenth time. And the nursing officer, so we have uniformed nurses in the Australian Army, looked and she just went, you know that every time you're on call, you get sick? And I went, yeah. I've picked this. And she went, that's a bad mental health sign. We need to get you help. I went, okay, game's up. And went to a psychiatrist. I think it took her like 10 minutes to diagnose me with PTSD. There were certain key deployments for the Australian Army where if you just say the name of the deployment to a psychiatrist who knows anything about the Army, they go, oh, crap. Yep, okay. So,
wow.
Yeah. There were first mentoring task force in 2010 in Uruzgan province in Afghanistan is one of those, which was one I was on. It was just really rough. And, that's warfare. But so essentially what was happening was it was almost like my body was rejecting the military life, going, no.
No more. I'm done.
The chief medical officer of the base went, we can't deploy you. We can't send you overseas, which means we can't use you.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, that's fair enough. So it was I didn't argue with it. And so I transitioned out. But as I was, the train smash was like maybe 6 months after that diagnosis. My youngest son started getting sick and we didn't know why. And took him to the doctor. Doctor couldn't see anything immediately, but then he went to, we call them optometrists. So he went to have his eyes tested.
Yeah. And
the optometrist did a pressure test on one of his eyes and said, no, there's actually something putting pressure on this eyeball. And he got diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Oh, my God.
And he ended up dying like about 18 months later. It was a very aggressive one.
Oh, my gosh.
How old was he?
He was 13 when he died.
Oh my God.
So he was not quite 12 when he was diagnosed.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was pretty awful.
I'm guessing because it was behind his eye, they couldn't like remove it or do anything with it because it's such a
Well,
sensitive area.
it was what's called a glioblastoma, which is probably the most dangerous of all. And if he'd survived it, he would have been in world first. Because the cancer was actually located in a part of the brain called the thalamus, but it had grown to that extent that was
Oh,
pushing up on his.
wow.
It
Wow.
was huge. The so this was the two factors together. And now initially, when I got out, I just sort of I transitioned to working in a church, but my wife and many others thought that me dealing with civilians was probably a bad plan. And
Oh my
certainly at a
gosh.
church level, because you do need to have some political skills that I had lost over years in the military. I had to stop doing it. I just couldn't. I didn't have the fuel in the tank to deal with other people's stuff and
Yeah.
to deal with my own, because we had a lot of stuff. But on one level, being in the military for so long really did help during Jonathan's illness, because one of the things that it does train in you is the ability to just do what needs to be done, even though you're screaming inside. You can kind of parallel process like, okay, I need to park my grief and rage over here for a minute. I'm going to hand my keys to the concierge. I'm going to go somewhere else for a bit. Then I'm going to come back and pick that up. So it was a pretty horrific time in a lot of ways, but all of my military experience actually was a real asset in that time. The mental health complications weren't an asset, but the other stuff was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just the ability to, okay, we need to do this, this, and this. What's the key? What's the fundamentals, the non-negotiables of life at this moment in time? Push the other things aside. Can't deal with them. And so, yeah, from when he was diagnosed, my wife immediately, we were living in the town of Wagga Wagga, where
That is a great name. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
There are no cool towns like that in America. I'm just saying. Not that I know. I've never heard of a town like that.
There's another one not far from Wagga Wagga called Grong Grong, which is probably my favourite.
Oh, that's a good one too.
Oh, it's but so he went to Sydney, and I stayed with our children who were at home at that point in time until after the operation. And the operation, everything actually was very successful, insofar as they could do anything, they did that, and it was well done. And that's one area where Australia and America are quite different in that, medical care for a condition like that is not onerously expensive. So
yeah, we talked to a guy that had a double lung transplant that's from Australia, and it was completely covered. So it was very interesting when she talked about that as well. How different your guys' healthcare is from ours.
So you've got your baseline medical care, which is called Medicare, which is for everyone, and then you can layer private health insurance on top of that. We were blessed in that we should have got a bill for the surgery, and the medical insurance probably would have paid like the vast majority of that. But they'll have maybe like what's called an excess that you have to pay. Mm-hmm. But somebody made the bill disappear.
Not sure who?
Nope.
I love it. That's
somebody so nice. At the hospital. I have my suspicions because I have a very close relative who's a doctor in that hospital.
Ah.
I think it may have been a case of send the bill to us. You don't see this bill anymore. You know, it was.
That's so sweet, though.
Well,
Oh,
either
it was
way,
awesome.
it's nice.
Yeah.
And then we moved to Brisbane, and he got radiation treatment and other things, which gave us some more time with him, really.
But never enough, honestly. It would never be enough time.
The doctor, the oncologist, this cancer specialist, when it came to the end of radiation treatment, he says, look, there's some other things we can do, but the question you have to ask yourselves is, like, I can't do anything that I think's effective. So he's very straight up honest.
Yeah.
So really what we got to aim for is enjoying life, not making the rest of his life suck.
Yeah.
And that was good. And when it came to it, the Queensland Children's Hospital actually set up a palliative care ward in our house. So they was with a bed and everything. It was good having walked through the death thing a number of times before. And Johnny, I mean, he had a very strong faith and a very impish, mischievous spirit that never left.
I love that.
His death was very, I would say, I'd call it quite defiant and victorious, really. But, in terms of, how we understand his eternal destiny and so forth, that's part of it. But it was also little things like when COVID started to be an issue here in Australia, the first thing that happened was that the nurses who came every day to check on Jonathan's palliative care medication started wearing masks, and his favourite nurse turned up with a mask on, and he goes, what's with the mask? And without thinking, she says, oh, it's in case she gets sick. And then he just starts to laugh his head off at her. And she's like, oh no.
He's like, I'm already there.
And he's like, am I going to get sick of this? And she's like, oh, so I don't have to do paperwork because of you, bucko. And so they're giving each other things. So it was, those were great moments in him, but it's awful. He died with a lot of hope. Somebody asked me, does that have to be the worst death that you've experienced? And I went, for me personally, no. Watching somebody cut down from a tree after they'd taken their own lives and taken away by police forensics, that's the worst thing I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
That's definitely more traumatic for sure.
Yeah, because it was just such a, you felt like you were standing on the edge of a howling abyss rather than, and even I'd say I talked to Jonathan about it and asked him, how do you feel about, particularly after he was told that he was for sure terminally ill. And he went, look, Dad, he said, I've thought about this for years, because he said, I knew every time you put on a particular uniform that somebody had died. And so he said, when that's in your face as a kid, you start to think. And so he made his peace with God fairly early in life.
Well, that's good.
And he lived his faith with a lot of courage. But it was that was very reassuring for us as parents too, because, and he was an absolute ratbag of a child, but he was the anarchist of all of our children.
Oh no!
Like he used to take the last house we lived when I was in the army was kind of 2.5 stories, and his room was downstairs. We always showered upstairs because it was a better shower. But 50% of the time, he'd do a naked run through the house.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like my brothers.
Yeah,
luckily, they would wear boxers, but that's about it.
And if there was visitors, so much the better. He was just.
Oh my goodness.
I
Are
love
these things
that.
that I have to look forward to? Oh boy.
I love the
Oh, they're
fiery
not all-
personality. Love it.
Here's so part of my ancestry is of 4 parts. Probably the largest part is Welsh, and there's English, Scottish, and then there's Basque. And he kind of embodied the Basque side. You know, if I didn't know where Jonathan was, all I had to do was put on some very boppy music, and he would emerge from somewhere dancing.
Hey,
He
what's
would
up?
just be, yeah, he would. Yeah, if I just cranked up Party Rock Anthem or something like that, he would just be coming out of nowhere. There he is.
Oh my god.
But-
I found you. You're still here. Great.
Yeah, sure.
Will you be home for dinner? That was the question that you were not answering.
So that was for us. It was dealing with that was very much our faith first was what was most key, and then the life lessons we had learned. It enabled me to show leadership in a situation that was freaking awful.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, it was pretty awful. So an army mate and I, we were talking about slow death versus fast, and whilst fast deaths are shocking to those around them, like a sudden death, the slow ones have a horror to them because you see you knew what the person was, and then you see what they become.
Yeah,
and that's pretty awful.
I'd have to agree with that because our grandma that we share was very quick. And granted, as much as it sucked, it was quick. But my other grandma spent 10 days in the hospital and it was awful. I saw her have a stroke on our couch. I had to call the ambulance. I saw her in the hospital. Like, it was not a fun experience.
Grandma's was weird though, because she was 92, but like at the same time, no one expected it. Everyone is like, this woman's gonna live forever. She goes on like little walks. She's super spunky. And then it was just in a blink of an eye. It was like and she just like left the world how she wanted to, because the few days before she was telling my mother that she didn't want to be a burden to everybody, and bam, gone.
She also had a very big faith though, like very faithful,
Yes.
very, very faithful to God. So I think that probably was part of it.
Yeah, it was a relief. It really was when he died, because it was torture for him and torture for us.
I can only imagine seeing your son in that kind of position.
Yeah, I think also too, I think if you think in terms of how to deal when the shit gets real, my childhood was probably, I mean, as I thought about it, it probably was helpful. My dad was a Korean War veteran.
There you go.
But he was 41 when I was born, and he was quite, as a parent, he was actually quite realistic. He didn't skirt around topics or cover it with fluffy bunnies and unicorns type stories, and nor did my mum. She'd grown up hard, and when I was 9, on the same day, one of my last grandfather died. I mean, I wasn't close to him, so that didn't really impact me. But there was a guy at school who died, and that did. And I suppose from an early age, I thought adversity is not exceptional; it's ordinary. So very often, I think a trap people fall into, and this was something I dealt with kids who joined the army. And I used to tell recruits, look, you need to leave the fluffy bunnies and unicorns view of the world out the door, because you're now entering into a world where you will see just how unrealistic that is.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic in civilian life, absolutely.
Right.
But you're just going to be showing how stupid it is. And for a lot of people, it's like, oh, you could see how they were thinking, yeah, I really do think that adversity is an abnormality, and that an easy time of it is what I'm entitled to. And when they start to realize that that's not true, that's a moment that can go either way. They can sometimes just fold, or they can, start to develop the resilience that they need to live in a world that's not perfect, where bad stuff does happen and will keep happening. Yeah, you do get a little bit twitchy because you're like, oh, nothing's gone crazy and wrong for a while.
Why is nothing going wrong?
When's it coming?
So how many kids do you have?
We have 6, including Johnny.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot of kids.
Yes,
You're a champ.
Not a Catholic.
That's funny.
We were just negligent when it came to any form of contraception. And
6 kids later, here we are.
Yes.
Are they all boys?
No, 4 boys.
Oh,
and
that's
2 girls.
kind of lucky.
The girls are the bookends. My eldest and my youngest are girls.
Oh, that's
there
cute.
you go.
Bookends.
I like that.
Yeah,
Girls are the bookends. I like that.
Then the terror cell in the middle.
The terror cell. Oh my God, that's brilliant.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, my oldest son he's the deeply philosophical, poetic one.
I wonder where he got that from.
Yeah. Son number 2 is kind of I don't care about subtlety. Just give me that stick over there, and I will solve this problem right now.
Oh,
he's like the inner Sven the Viking is very strong.
Oh, that's funny.
It's
a good comparison.
The next son is more. He's the calculating. He gets through using his
Your
head,
brain,
rather than his muscle, like his immediately older brother. And then Jonathan was he was the party animal.
Go figure.
He was,
and then the 2 daughters are just like, help.
well, sometimes yes. Although the youngest one has significant defense mechanisms in that she has this really wild. She's quite artistic, really wild imagination. And
again, I wonder where she gets that from.
Yeah. And the oldest one is she's an exercise physiologist, but she also runs her own web design firm.
Wow,
very cool.
Well, this is how she's trying to pay for uni.
Nice.
Really. Yes, yeah. Just quite a story, actually. She got a bit depressed in school, and the school was not very compassionate and kicked her out.
What?
And they were awful.
Oh my gosh, that's rude.
I made the deputy principal of that school shake with fear.
Good. Someone should.
I didn't yell, which is surprising, but using the quiet, intense military voice is sometimes the best solution, because people will absolutely crap themselves. And she did. And it was really quite wrong what they did. But the thing is, she from that point, she got they're called TAFEs in Australia, Technical and Further Education Establishment. It doesn't give you a degree, it gives you a diploma.
Oh, okay.
And she got a diploma in web design. Then she went and worked in Canada for 2 years doing web design. She came back and she secured a mature age entry into university to do exercise physiology. And it's like everything that high school denied from her is irrelevant. She got past it anyway, so it was really great.
That
awesome.
Is great. Well, speaking of your bookends, tell us about your books.
Yeah, well, I don't know how your husband has felt at times, or how you felt being a military spouse and stuff, but I realised after being in a short time that the people I went to university with didn't get me. Now, that may have been the fact that they were scared by phraseology such as, I don't know, US Marines. They've got some quite memorable one-liners they use on recruits. Australian and the British forces are no different. Things like I'll rip out your spine and use you as a wetsuit. Um,
Yep.
That's one. Wow.
now it's obviously physically impossible, but it's always very effective.
Yeah.
Or if a recruit does something dumb, they would say, "Did you get sacked from McDonald's for licking the hot plate?" So,
That's a good one.
yeah. So there's that sort, and the army, particularly the Australian Army, is very blunt and to the point.
That's my kind of army. I'm a very blunt person.
It does mean that when you get when you deal with civilians, and particularly, I suppose, for me, dealing with civilians at church, who are often hyper polite and a little bit passive aggressive, that was not a good, not a good mix at all. And people didn't. A week after I got back from Afghanistan, I was standing at church, and I was drinking a can of Coke. Now, Australian Coke's actually different to American.
Yes.
I learned. It uses cane sugar, so it's a bit more like Mexican Coca-Cola.
Okay.
And I don't know, but every church I've ever been to seems to have a resident health Nazi who wants to nag everybody.
Oh God.
And this woman came up to me and she proceeded to lecture me. That stuff's going to kill you. I've just come back from a war zone, and she says that stuff's going to kill you. But at the word kill, all of the safety mechanisms in my mind are just sort of switch off. And I turned to her, and the first words that came out of my mind are, "You will die." And I said that in a very loud voice. The whole church hall stops moving. Her husband comes up, and then he takes a step kind of half back from me because he sees the look on my face. And I proceeded to give her a real serve about, no matter what health kick you are on, you need to face the fact that you are going to die. And if your faith does not comfort you in death, then what do you actually believe anyway? And so I'm like, boom, boom, boom. And yeah, I come out of that moment and I realize that people are scared. And I find that annoying because I didn't actually say I was going to use deadly force against her. It kind of came across like that. But
no, you were just trying to make a point. It was just a very blunt point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I thought, these people don't get us. We actually, when you join the military, you become part of a subculture that is isolated from the rest of the culture. And this is actually a problem for, American veterans, German veterans, British, is when you come back and then when you leave the military, everything about you as a person is distinct and potentially tension causing, and that becomes a real issue for veterans. So I partly wrote because I wanted to give people a book saying this is what it's like. So I haven't written like Jack Reacher type characters as such. I haven't done a novel about the most daring thing that a special forces raid has ever done. This is just about ordinary bog standard soldiering.
Mm-hmm.
And the way people interact, the way people think, the way they apply what they believe in those sorts of situations. And that's been, I also wrote to process my own stuff. So it helps me distill my experience. I think a lot of people immediately get that part. It's understand the army. And that's got some interesting reactions. Actually, the biggest adverse reaction I've had is I've got two main characters, one male, one female. The female main character, who's also army, she freaks some women out. She's very polarizing.
Okay.
Because she is a take no prisoners. Yeah, if you do that again, I will perform a vasectomy on you via the throat kind of person. She is
okay.
backward in coming forward. And for people who want to read that, I've had a number of women say to me, look, that character frightens me to death. Interesting, because that's my friends. My female friends in the army were like that. And I accepted that as normal. My wife was not military, but she came from British Army family. So she understood kind of how it worked. The Brits are very different in certain respects, particularly British officers. They're much more civil in their interactions than Australian officers are. They value that, whereas Australian officers tend to be pretty rough and ready. So that's why I wrote that, and I'm halfway through the series. I've got 2 more to go, which takes the main characters out of the military and into civilian life. So
those will be important. I know a lot
Yeah.
of we've talked to a lot of veterans that talk about the difficulties of transition and transitioning itself. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that'll be well received.
Yeah, it's really tricky, because I think the military just sort of comes in and takes over everything about you, whether you like it or not. And my wife will say that I bleed green, that I bleed camouflage. And, you know, when I plan something, or when I'm going somewhere, it still sort of has a massive influence. But that doesn't have to be a disadvantage. Interestingly, there's one country in the world where the military-civilian divide does not exist. That's Israel, because they have universal national service. And so all males have that experience, and many females do as well. What they found is there is actually no civilian-military divide there, which means the community transition for military people is not hard. Whereas, you imagine and is this actually, I think it was sometimes worse for the guys who came from affluent backgrounds. They'd go to school. In this high-end private school, they might go to university first, they join the army, and then 10 years later they come across their old friends and they realise, oh boy, this is, I'm from another planet.
Yeah.
Because my whole life is centered around something that is like, I went to a wedding of an army friend who had been a futures trader before she joined the military. She and half of the wedding were futures traders, and the other half were military people.
Oh, that's an odd mixture of people.
It was a Mexican standoff. Because
it sounds like it.
I'm having a giggle with a friend who got into a gunfight with drug runners in far north Queensland, because we use the military for patrolling more vulnerable border areas in Australia. They got shot at by these drug runners, and they kind of like, well, yeah, have it your way. I see your bolt action rifle, and I raise you a machine gun. And, when these drug runners surrendered, they said they needed a change of underwear. They were just like, and they were just sitting there shaking because bits of tree had started flying off.
Oh, my gosh.
We're talking about this and laughing our heads off. And there's 2 futures traders who go,
what in the hell?
Staring.
Yeah. So, any closing comments for our listeners? Any parting advice you'd like to give them?
I think the main thing that I would say is seek experiences that take you beyond what's comfortable, because what you feel is comfortable may suddenly disappear. And those experiences will teach you a lot about yourself, and that's what's really important. Whether it's abseiling, rock climbing, or some other thing that pushes you, that helps you to actually kind of boil down your strengths and weaknesses and what you can bring to the party when things do turn to custard on you. And that's where you can actually reflect on your own life and beliefs and to think, often people will say, I believe this, and you go, okay, let's see how you say, whether what you say when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And then you'll see what they actually functionally believe, not what they say they believe. And it's in that wash up from those seeking out adventure that we can actually go through times of reflection and consolidate what we believe, which is, how that worked for me. I didn't grow up in a church home at all. My father, his religion was Queen's Regulations and Admiralty Instructions. That was
that. And that was my growing up.
Yeah. I learned how to make a bed military style when I was 12. So yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That was, he just taught it because it was, and he insisted that I could cook, clean, wash, iron, and mend clothes.
That sounds great. I think that should be applied to more men.
Yeah. So, that was when my wife met me at university, she realized, hang on a minute, this guy he irons his own
do
clothes.
Everything.
Yes.
I'm keeping him.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Well, this is the How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. And don't forget to rate and review us, and we'll see you all next episode. And thank you for coming, Roger.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.